maybe, possibly. As my wife walks out on me, that's always concerning. And she closed the doors behind her. That's even better. All right, we'll go and get started. Does anyone need the Lord's Supper this morning that was downstairs? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. I'm going to say a prayer here real quick, and then we'll take a minute of just silence. Father, we again thank you for just the time to come together this morning, to worship, to study, to come around the table, and just be thankful that we are your children and that you are the Creator and you are our God. Please just be with us the next couple of minutes as those partake of the Lord's Supper. Help them to focus on the cross, help them to examine our lives, and then guide us afterwards as we get into the Old Testament and see how you use those Old Testament fathers to advance your kingdom. In Christ we pray. Amen. Noted there in my prayer, I feel kind of bad because this being Mother's Day, I'm talking exclusively about men today. There are wonderful examples of women in the Bible. I'm just not going to touch on them today. That's just where we are in Genesis right now. So I apologize to mothers in advance. So we were not here last week. We were actually up helping the teens there in their survival week. Morrison's did a great job getting the teens together, teaching them survival skills. Their verse for the week was 1 Peter 3:15, where it talks about always being prepared to give an account for your defense, for the hope that's in you. So they use that to talk about not only how to survive in the wilderness, but also how to survive in your Christianity. Now, when you talk about survival, what's the one fear that kind of governs in that situation? Is it like peace, contentment, tranquility? Fear, right? So I was asked to help facilitate that fear Saturday night. And so paid them a little visit there after dark and spent a half an hour kind of going around the camp, breaking sticks, going through leaves, and making coyote sounds. So I learned the next morning as we got together for our worship service and Bible study that girls handle this a lot better than boys, apparently. That teens do know how to pray, and that teenage boys do lay on the ground and cry when they're scared. Yeah, it sounded like it was effective from what Chris and Jackie told me. So,
isn't it fair to say Jackie carries the gun, though?
That's why I made sure she knew I was coming, and why I didn't go back later, because I didn't want rounds coming down range to me. But it was a good week. I think the teens really enjoyed being together. I think there was some spiritual growth, but also just being out in nature and learning things there. So make sure you thank Chris and Jackie for that, especially for sleeping out in 32-degree weather, which, yeah, we slept in the bed at my mom's house. We weren't doing that. But make sure you thank them for that. All right, so last time I was up here, we were in Genesis 46. If you guys want to go ahead and turn to that, we can kind of follow along. So last time when we started up, Jacob and his family, they were heading to Egypt after Joseph's invitation. And it helps if I turn it on. There you go. Give me my silly little cartoon pictures. So they were heading to Egypt. How many people were in the group? Does anybody remember? 70 names, plus wives, servants, and others. So this is a fairly substantial group that's heading to Egypt. What did they have with them? They had their possessions, but more importantly, they had their livestock. Why?
Because they wanted to bring them. They weren't supposed to.
Right. Pharaoh told them, leave all your stuff behind. I got better stuff for you. But they're shepherds. They know the animals. They want to take them with them. So they have all their livestock with them in tow. Now, one of the brothers got sent ahead to find directions. Who was that? Anybody remember? That was Judah. He got sent ahead to find out exactly where Joseph wanted him to go. Why would it have been Judah? Was he the oldest? I mean, typically in that type of culture, you had to send the oldest son to go figure it out. What number is Judah? Fourth, exactly. We've talked about this quite before. And the reason I bring this up is in the culture of the Hebrews, birth order is everything. Family ancestry is everything. And when you study the Old Testament, it gives you a whole new perspective of the New Testament. Because what is a large portion of the New Testament trying to refute when it comes to Gentiles and Hebrews? That Gentiles are just as good as the Hebrews. God came through the Hebrew nation, but now Christ died for all, and it's been expanded. And that was really hard for the Israelite nation, the Hebrews, to just get around. And Paul wrote this multiple times in his books of the Gentiles are grafted in, and Christ died for all. There's no male, there's no female, there's no Jew, there's no Greek. So that's why I keep kind of harping on this age kind of cultural difference, because you don't understand the New Testament if you don't understand that to some degree. So Judah gets sent ahead. He's fourth. Judah finds out exactly where Joseph wants him to go, and the group enters the land of Goshen. Now, where is Goshen? Remember? It's right there, just in case you kind of forget. It's in the Nile River Delta, which, if you look, everything is brown, which means sand, death, desert. Up here, you have green, which means life, water, plants. If you're going to be a shepherd, where do you want to go, brown or green? Green, yeah. So Goshen is in that Nile Delta region. Now, the significance about this is the area that Jacob and his family came from. This is what the landscape looked like. If you have livestock, what's better, that or this? Yes, this is the land of Goshen, and that's why Joseph wanted them to settle there. All right, so Joseph, once the family's in Goshen, Joseph heads out to meet his father. He hasn't seen him in 20 years. And what's the reunion like? Hi, son. Hi, Dad. Lots of emotion, lots of crying. Come on, what would you expect? I mean, it's an emotional reunion. Like I said last time, if I could see my dad again, I'd be an emotional wreck. I mean, it would be fantastic. And this is the reunion that they have. Now, what was the odd statement that Jacob made after this moment? All right, remember that? Verse 30. Now let me die. I mean, you've just seen your son after 20 years that you thought was dead. And you're like, oh, that's great. Okay, I'm ready to go now. It's like, no, hey, how you been? Let's catch up. Let me see your kids. It's just, I'm ready to die. But this really expresses, I think, the turmoil, that inner pain that Jacob was feeling, because now that he's seen his son again, it's complete peace. He's just completely content. So that's why he makes this statement. So Jacob and company are in Egypt, but they still need to get Pharaoh's blessing to stay in Goshen. Now Joseph, very powerful person in Egypt, right? Is he the most powerful? No, who's above him? Pharaoh. So Pharaoh still needs to sign off. And Joseph, he knows where he stands, so he starts playing a little politics. He tells his family that when they're presented to Pharaoh, that they need to explain that they are keepers of livestock. They are, so I'm not sure what else he was expecting them to say, but he's not taking any chances when they go before Pharaoh. Joseph wants them to stay in the most fertile land of Egypt, wants them to stay in the best land. And I think he wants them to stay away from the main population centers also of the Egyptians. Why would that be? The Bible gives us a couple hints. First of all, it says multiple times that shepherds are loathsome, is what the biblical word is, to the Egyptians. The Egyptians think shepherds are second-class citizens, that they're not proper. They don't want to associate with them. They're just low-class people, or shepherds. So Joseph wants to kind of isolate them from this. Also, this is a very large group of foreigners coming in from the outside. There's a famine going on. Are there plentiful resources? No. If you have this large group taking away food, taking away resources, there's going to be resentment. Joseph sees what can happen, and he tries to prevent that resentment from growing. Now, he's successful in his lifetime, but what happens after Joseph dies? Eventually, what he foresees takes over, and the Israelite nation goes into captivity, into slavery. All right, so Joseph takes 5 brothers to see Pharaoh. They follow the script. Pharaoh signs off on staying in Goshen. What else does he tell them during this encounter? Pharaoh says, I want you to be in charge of what? His livestock, his animals. He says, if you know any wise and godly men, put them in charge also of mine. Now, this shows, I think, Pharaoh's wisdom. He realizes they're a blessed group of people, that they are very good at what they do of raising his livestock. He wants his herd to grow, so he shows wisdom by putting it over. And this is where we now see the Israelite people starting to work for the crown of Egypt. Right now it's employment. What will it be later? Slavery. They're still going to be working from the crown, but it's a whole different business arrangement. Right now it's employment, then it will be slavery. Next is Jacob's turn after the brothers go in and do their thing. And what is Pharaoh most hung up on during that encounter? Between Pharaoh and Jacob. What's the one thing Pharaoh is stuck on? Jacob's age, exactly. They were obsessed about living long lives. There wasn't that history in the Egyptian culture like it was with the Hebrews. They were experts at preserving bodies through mummification. So you have a 130-year-old man standing in front of a much younger Pharaoh. He is amazed with this because what's Pharaoh trying to achieve? Long life. I mean, the benefit of being a Christian is we have hope after death. People of the world don't have that. So what they want to do is hold on to what they do, and that's living a longer life here. For us, I mean, it's nice. We can serve God. We can fellowship together while we're here, but ultimately, we're going to a better place of heaven. We have a hope that the world doesn't have. And Pharaoh is expressing that right now because he's so hung up on the age. Jacob's 130 years old, but he says, hey, compared to my ancestors, I'm the young one. Because remember, we talked about the chart. You've got people in his past, very near past, that lived hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years more. 130 is just a young buck. I mean, he's a young guy. Pharaoh is fascinated with this, and they spend some time talking about that. Now, at the end of their conversation, what happens? Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Why is this strange? We brought up a Hebrews verse last time. The lesser is blessed by the greater. Who is the greater in this scenario? Pharaoh, king of Egypt, or Jacob? Well, it kind of depends. Pharaoh is still king, but Jacob puts himself in a higher position and blesses Pharaoh. Now, I don't think Pharaoh was offended by this at all. In fact, through this encounter, I kind of imagine those two parting ways, seeing each other almost as equals and having a very deep respect for one another through it. So introductions have been made, living arrangements are settled. However, there's still a famine going on in the land. So Joseph needs to continue to look after his family by making sure that they have grain to eat. Where does Joseph get the grain? All those storehouses that he put together during the 7 years of abundance early on. Now, it's nice that Jacob and company have this kind of personal relationship with the second most powerful man in Egypt. What about the rest of the population? What kind of connection do they have? Not nearly as good. And I mentioned last time when we closed that it's this encounter that we're going to get to here in a couple minutes that fundamentally changes Egypt into a whole different society. So comments or questions before we jump back into it? All right, so we've moved into Genesis 47. If you want to go over into there. All right, so it's, like I said before, it's these transactions that shift that culture into what we typically think of as the Egyptian culture that we learned back in elementary school in history class. So look at verses 14 through 20. We're going to read here a little bit of a lengthy section. Starting in verse 14, Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence? For our money is gone." Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. He fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. That's the key. Verse 18, when that year ended, they came to him the next year and said, we will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent and the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes? Both we and our land, buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. Verse 20, so Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, and every Egyptian sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. Through this couple-year period, things completely changed. We tend to think of Egypt as kind of this cult-like society. I mean, that's what we're taught in history class, and it certainly was. But prior to the famine, Egypt appears to have been a completely different society. Pharaoh was still a powerful king. He was the guy in charge. He had power over life and death, but he didn't seem to be that godlike figure. I mean, we've already seen him show respect to God through Joseph, acknowledging that he is not a god. He seems to just be that king-like figure. But here, and also it appears that the land ownership and a lot of the wealth resided with not Pharaoh, I'm sure he was a wealthy guy, but also with the people of Egypt. They had their own ownership of land, property, livestock, wealth. After the famine, who owns everything? Pharaoh. Now, the research I've done actually follows, the worldly history research follows what's said here. And which shouldn't be surprising, because what's the best history book in the world? The Bible. I mean, the Bible is history. Everybody else is spending time trying to figure out and come to the conclusions which are actually already in the Bible. And if you look at research, Egypt was a powerful kingdom. But eventually, they had a turning point. Suddenly, Pharaoh goes from a powerful king to a god. There's this jump that's made. And Genesis says, I think this is where it happens. Pharaoh owns now everything, except for the land of the priest. There is a caveat in there in Genesis. But Pharaoh gives them food, so he still controls the priest. So he really has everything. We've all heard the phrase, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So it's easy to see going from Pharaoh, king, knowing his place, to now, oh, I know everything, and a future Pharaoh suddenly elevating himself to godlike status. And this is where it happens, and it's because of Joseph. Joseph is the one that makes the deals and makes the arrangements. Now, even though Pharaoh owns everything, the land still has to get worked. So what kind of system does Joseph put in place? Look at verses 23 through 26. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now, here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own for seed, for the field, and for your food, and for those of your households, and as food for your little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives! Exclamation point. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, valid to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priest did not become Pharaoh's. Did you notice that the people are cheering to become slaves? That just kind of jumped out at me. Now, for those of you that are, Star Wars geeks, and I may kind of touch into that a little bit, I immediately thought of one of the scenes where there's a statement that said, this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. That was a scene that just kind of jumped, and I kind of see the same thing here. These people are saying, we give up our freedom. We are now slaves, and we're happy about it. It's a very interesting situation. It also reminded me of something that's going to happen a few hundred years later in the Israelite nation. when the Israelites eventually found themselves back in Canaan, living under the judges, but what did they ask God for? So, a king, because they want to be just like everybody else. Does God say, hey, that's a great idea? No, in fact, he says the opposite. He says, if this is what you want, you can have a king, but he is going to turn your sons into daughters and your slaves. He's going to impress them into his army. He's going to make them his servants. He's going to tax you. He's going to take away your wealth. What do the people say after they hear that? Cool. We still want a king. And what eventually happens? Well, God made a prediction, so it came true. It's pretty obvious. It's the same situation here. And you can apply this to today if you really want to go into politics, but I'm not going to go that route, where people will start cheering because they're giving up all their freedoms. It's just an interesting situation here that you see happen out. Anyway, back to Egypt. What kind of system did Joseph institute? The people became tenant farmers. The Egyptian people, they belonged to Pharaoh. I mean, technically, he owns them. It's almost like a slave system. However, it's also more of a tenant farmer where they stay on their lands and they're working Pharaoh's land for him. What was the payment in return? A fifth, 20% of all of the earnings of the field go to Pharaoh, go to the crown. Now, this really isn't a bad deal, is it? 20%? And you get to keep 80% for your own use? I mean, that's not really a heavy tax. I mean, 20% income tax is not terrible in a lot of cases. Think about it. They get to keep that. So Joseph is treating the people fair. He's not saying, I want 50% of everything. He's just saying, I want 20. Not really bad. Joseph is making sure it's a fair arrangement for the people, but also for Pharaoh. So the famine, it runs its course, but Egypt looks dramatically different now than it did 7 years earlier. Pharaoh is the legal owner of all the land, the livestock, the people themselves. Except for a time of war, I can't imagine a society changing more in history than what Egypt did right now, even though it was technically a time of peace. So after we see this arrangement worked out, the text then switches back to Jacob and his family. We learned that through this time, Jacob did really well. He actually acquired property. Whereas all the other Egyptians were giving everything away. He acquired property and his family grows. Jacob lives in Goshen for 17 years to the age of 147. Not a bad age, but still young compared to the ancestors. And he's getting close to death. So he calls for Joseph so that he can ask him a question. What's his request in verse 29, chapter 47? What's he ask of Joseph? He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. Where does he want to be buried? With his fathers. Where are they? Canaan, and where? The cave of Machpelah. That is the ancestral burial ground, is in that cave, and he wants to be returned to that. Now, Joseph, he's one of the youngest of the sons here, so why does Jacob ask him instead of Reuben, which again would have been the oldest son? Why ask number 11 when you can ask number 1? Reuben should have been the guy that, okay, I'm now the one in charge. We're going to deal with my father's remains. But he asked number 11. I think there's 2 reasons. First of all, Joseph is the most powerful of all the brothers. He's number 2 in the whole land of Egypt. So if all other brothers get together and say, hey, we want to take our father back to Canaan, if Joseph says, no, you're not, who's going to win? Joseph, because he's kind of got the army behind him that can stop the 11 brothers. And so Jacob needs Joseph's buy-off, his blessing, so he asks him. But there's another reason. How close are Egypt and Canaan? Not that close. You're looking at days, at least, if you're going very, very quick, probably weeks worth of travel to get back to Canaan. Now, this is a very warm environment. What happens to bodies in a warm environment? They decay. If someone passed away and they immediately took the body and started traveling to Canaan, what's going to happen? It's not going to go well when they get there. What were the Egyptians experts at? Mummification. That is where you take a body and make it, basically invincible to decay, whatever word I'm looking for there. We're still finding bodies in Egypt that have been dead thousands of years old that you can recognize faces, that you can see them perfectly preserved. Joseph was in a position to make this happen. Jacob could have been transported to Canaan in a much nicer fashion than what the brothers could have done by themselves. So that's why he calls in Joseph and he asks these questions. Joseph promises to take his father's body back to his ancestors, and chapter 47 ends with, I think, a wonderful sentence. The last part of verse 31. Then Israel, Jacob, bowed in worship at the head of the bed. Jacob is near his life. He knows this, and he bows in worship to God. Looking back at his life, does Jacob have any reason to thank God? Has God been good to Jacob? Has he blessed him? Absolutely. God protected him over and over, even from himself sometimes, as we've seen some of the stories. He blessed him with a large family. In a very real sense, he gave his son back to him that he thought was dead. During the time of worship, do you think Jacob asked for forgiveness for any of his actions? Do you think Jacob had any regrets for actions that he committed against God or against man? He should have if he didn't. Jacob did not live a perfect life. This was the liar. This was the usurper. This was the trickster. This was the one that didn't always demonstrate faith in God when he should have. But here at the end of his life, he bows in worship at his bed. There appears to be a short period of time that passes between Genesis 47 and 48, because chapter 48 opens with a messenger telling Joseph that his father is about to die. Jacob knew he was getting close to the end of his life, but now the end is really getting near and a messenger gets sent to Joseph. What does Joseph do? What do we typically do when we get that message? We go to be with that person. And remember, these are not different people than we are. They're still humans. They're same emotions, the same feelings. They still have the same reactions that we do thousands of years later. Joseph doesn't go along. He takes his two oldest sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh is the firstborn. He's the oldest. Ephraim is the second. So when Joseph enters the room, he manages to sit up. And Jacob, he does a little reminiscing here. Look at verses 3 and 4. Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. And he said, Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of people, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Do you think Joseph knows this? I mean, do you think he really needs the history lesson? I'm like, okay, Dad, I know this. Why are you telling me again? Jacob is really setting the stage for what he's going to do next. Verses 5 and 6. Now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Jacob is claiming Joseph's two oldest sons as his own. He's claiming that they are going to be the ones that carry God's promise to Jacob down the line through the ages. He's essentially giving them each a full portion of the inheritance. Remember, at the end of someone's life in this culture, however many sons, sorry daughters, I told you it was a really bad Mother's Day lesson. However many sons, that's what it got divided up into, except for one son that got a double portion. One son would get twice as much as all the others. Other than that, it was an equal division of property and goods. Jacob here is giving Ephraim and Manasseh an equal share of the goods, just like Reuben and Simeon. Traditionally, which son received the double portion? The first. It's always the first. Not always, but pretty much it's the first, the oldest son. The oldest is also the one that typically gets the leadership position. Which number is Joseph? Number 11, that's pretty far down the line for a double portion. Why do you think he gets this special privilege? Look at verse 7. That gives us a hint to what the answer, I think, is. Now, as for me, when I came to Paddan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey. Then there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Now, it appears that Joseph receives this honor because he was the firstborn son of Rachel. What was Rachel in the ranking of wives? Physically, she was number 2, but the first loved wife of all. He's the one that Jacob fell in love with. He's the one that he arranged the 7-year deal with Laban. I'll work for 7 years if I can marry her. It's Laban that slipped in Leah that became the first wife, and then Jacob had to do another 7 years to get Rachel. But Rachel is the first among wives when it comes to love. So it seems like Joseph, being the firstborn son of the most loved wife, gets the double portion. However, he's not going to get the leadership position. That's going to go to a different son. And it's not going to be Reuben, the oldest. He's going to be in for a little surprise as well. But Joseph again, firstborn of the most loved wife, puts him figuratively in as the first son. So after Jacob shares this grief with Joseph, he sees Joseph's son and asks who they are. Now, has Jacob never met his grandsons? He's met his sons. We're pretty sure of that. Verse 10 tells us that Jacob's what is failing? His eyesight is failing. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to Joseph in this moment. I mean, we've been in similar situations with parents or grandparents. How many people have had to walk into the room and be asked by one of their most loved grandparents, who are you? And you've had to say, hey, it's me, Adam, your grandson. We've been, I think, in a very similar situation, just because they don't recognize us or perhaps their memory is gone a little bit. Again, real people, just like us, going through very similar situations. So Joseph explains who they are, and he brings them close to Jacob, who embraces them. Verse 11, Jacob says, Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your children as well. Now, I'm sure Jacob was very emotional at this point. He thought Joseph was dead. Not only does he get to see Joseph again, but now he gets to see his grandsons. This is all kind of coming home. He's getting near to the end of his life, and he's realizing what's important. Joseph then bows to his father, and he puts Ephraim on his right side, Jacob's left side, and he puts Manasseh on his left side, which is Jacob's right. So if I am Jacob, then I have Manasseh and Ephraim. If I am Jacob, you guys are Joseph. There you go. Why is the reason for this arrangement? When it comes to the culture, which side is the side of power? The right. Why is that? Because the right is the dominant hand. Sorry, you lefties, you're oddities. The right side is the right side. That's why they call it the right side. It's just the way it is. So if you think about it, who is the term right-hand man? That's the second guy in charge. It's the one that can get things done. The right side is the position of power. Manasseh, being the oldest, gets put on the right side by Joseph. All right. So Manasseh's the oldest. So in Joseph's mind, he should be the one that receives the greatest honor. He should be on Jacob's right side. However, what does Jacob do? Look at verse 14. So Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. There's your little picture. But in case you guys need a visual demonstration, ready? Watcha. All right, you don't need to see that again. That's what Jacob did. He crossed his hands. That right side with Manasseh, suddenly that hand went onto Ephraim and vice versa. Jacob is Yeah, all right. Verse 15 and 16. So he crossed his hands. Jacob says, verse 15, he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been the shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. And may my name live on in them, and the names of their fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now, it's really not a specific blessing or a foretelling or a prediction. It's just Jacob telling the boys that God has been his guide throughout the ages, and that he hopes that they will follow in his steps of worshiping God and that they'll have many descendants. However, what happens immediately after Jacob speaks? Look at verse 17. Then Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it displeased him. And he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Now, if you think about this encounter, I don't know if the picture does it justice, but you kind of picture Joseph having his head down when Jacob reaches his hands out and starts blessing. You kind of see Joseph just acknowledging a little bit. But as soon as the blessing is done and he looks up, he sees what happened. And he's not too happy about it. There's two terms that in that verse that I want to look at that really tells us Joseph's reaction to what happened. Displeased and grasp. Those are the two words that jumped out to me. From displeased, we know Joseph's not happy about it. He's really not liking the hand placement at this moment. But it's the grasp that tells us the level of the displeasure. Did Joseph just say, hey, Dad, I think you made a mistake? You get the picture of him physically grabbing his father's hands to move them. You didn't really do that in this culture. Even though Joseph is a powerful figure in Egypt, he's still the son. You don't grab your father's hand and physically move him and say, you are wrong, Dad. This is kind of a big deal of what he does. But that's how unhappy he is with what Jacob's done. He's trying to move it forcefully. Why is he so upset? Jacob, in the blessing, he really didn't single out one son above the other. He's just saying both equal. I hope you're blessed. I hope you have great descendants. I hope you follow God. The fact that the right hand has the greatest honor and the greatest blessing, that should go on the oldest in Joseph's mind. So in verse 18, Joseph tells his father that his right hand should be on Manasseh's head. Now, there's a bit of irony here that I love. Joseph seems to be stuck on the oldest has the greatest honor. What number is Joseph? Number 11. How quickly we forget. It's such an ironic thing when you look at it. He's the one, Joseph's descendants are receiving the double portion. That should go to the firstborn, and he's number 11. Just very odd. So what's Jacob's reaction to this rebuke by Joseph? Look at verses 19 through 20. But his father refused and said, I know my son. I know my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. He blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Did Jacob just make a mistake and then decide to roll with it? No. How do we know this? Did you notice back in verse 5, when Jacob first mentions Joseph's sons, what was the order that he used? When Joseph comes in, this is Manasseh and Ephraim. But when Jacob first speaks, even before the hand incidents, he says the opposite way around. Jacob knew exactly what he was doing. It was always his intention to put the younger before the oldest. Why? I don't really know. Was it a divine revelation? Was this something that he felt God wanted him to do? Was it just he remembered his older brother Esau and had a thing about older brothers and he just tried to make it switch? Not really sure, but the result is that he put the older below the younger. Again, a great example of God came through the Hebrew nation. That's why we're studying this. That's why we study the Old Testament, to see how God used a group of people for his service. But as soon as Christ came, he didn't die for just the Hebrew nation. He died for all of us. Thankfully, because we are all Gentiles here. We are the ones that were grafted in to the root of Israel, to the root of Abraham. Christ died for all. There is no male. There is no female. Sorry, mothers, I'm really just tearing this whole thing down. There is no Jew. There is no Greek. We are all equal. We have different gifts. We have different abilities. We have different roles that we play in our service to God. But we are all equal and we are all loved by God. And Jesus died for each and every one of us. That's the beauty of studying the Old Testament. So that was it. And by coincidence, that is the end of page 100 of my lesson series. So, we're not done yet, though. We're going to keep going, but we're going to pick up with further blessings of the sons there next time. So, any comments or questions before we close out? All right, let's close in prayer. Father, we again thank you for this time of study that we've had. We thank you for just the worldly day also that's been set aside where we can be thankful for our mothers, for the wisdom that they gave to us, for the upbringing. A lot of us here were brought to you through our mothers, through that example and through that teaching, and help us to be so thankful for our parents, but also thankful for you, the great Father that loves us as children and wants to spend an eternity with us. Please guide us as we go out today. Help us as we just enjoy our time with our family. Help you to be front and center through that and help us to be servants for you. In Christ we pray. Amen.